At 83 years old, Frank Zane still trains 5 days a week, his physique a testament to decades of discipline. But in a recent interview, the three-time Mr. Olympia made a revelation that shocked the bodybuilding community. When asked to name his favorite bodybuilders of all time, his choices weren't what anyone expected. Some were legends from the golden era, others were mass monsters who represented everything Zane's aesthetic physique opposed. The list reveals something deeper about the man who defined what it means to have a perfect body, and why his influence still shapes the sport today. Frank Zane didn't just win Mr. Olympia 3 consecutive times from 1977 to 1979. He redefined what bodybuilding could be. While competitors pushed past 250 pounds of mass, Zane never weighed more than 195 pounds on stage. They called him the chemist because of his background in education, but the nickname fit for another reason. He approached bodybuilding like a science experiment, calculating every angle, every proportion, every muscle fiber to create something that looked like it had been sculpted by the gods themselves. His waist measured just 29 inches, his shoulders spread wide, and his abs looked like they'd been carved from granite. He became one of only 3 men to ever defeat Arnold Schwarzenegger in competition, and he did it by being everything Arnold wasn't. Smaller, more refined, absolutely symmetrical. Today when fans watch Chris Bumstead dominate the classic physique division, they're watching Zane's legacy. Bumstead himself has said that Zane's physique is the blueprint, the standard by which all aesthetic builds should be measured. But what many don't know is how Zane developed his eye for the perfect physique, and which bodybuilders shaped his understanding of what the human body could achieve. His recent list of favorites pulls back the curtain on 5 decades of observation, respect, and sometimes rivalry. And his number 1 pick might just change how you think about bodybuilding forever. When Zane named Steve Reeves as his top choice, it wasn't just nostalgia talking. Reeves competed in the 1940s and 50s, long before Zane ever touched a weight, but his influence on bodybuilding culture was absolutely massive. Reeves stood 6'1" with a 52-inch chest, 29-inch waist, and arms that looked like they belonged on a statue. He won Mr. America, Mr. World, and Mr. Universe before Hollywood came calling. His role as Hercules in the 1958 film made him an international superstar, and introduced millions of people to the idea that the male body could be both powerful and beautiful. Reeves represented classical proportions, the kind you'd see on ancient Greek sculptures, where every muscle served a purpose and nothing was overdeveloped. For Zane, Reeves was the ultimate ideal. While other kids in the 1950s wanted to be cowboys or astronauts, young Frank Zane saw Reeves on screen and knew exactly what he wanted to become. Reeves proved that you didn't need to be the biggest guy in the room to have the best physique. He showed that symmetry, proportion, and presentation mattered more than raw size. When Zane talks about Reeves, there's a reverence in his voice. He said that if he could have any physique in history, it would be Reeves's. That's a bold statement from a man who built one of the greatest physiques ever seen. But it reveals Zane's core philosophy. Bodybuilding isn't about building the most muscle, it's about building the right muscle in the right places. Reeves understood that in the 1950s, and Zane carried that torch through the 1970s and beyond. The influence is obvious when you compare their physiques side by side. Both had incredibly small waists that created an extreme V-taper. Both focused on shoulder width and lat development to enhance that taper. Both believed that less could be more, that refinement beat brutality. Reeves competed at around 215 pounds, Zane at 195. And both looked bigger than men who outweighed them by 50 pounds because of how they were put together. When Zane prepared for competitions, he studied Reeves's poses, his presentation, the way he controlled every muscle. This wasn't just admiration, it was education. Larry Scott showing up at number 2 makes perfect sense when you understand Zane's appreciation for innovation. Scott wasn't just the first Mr. Olympia ever, winning in 1965 and 1966. He revolutionized how bodybuilders trained their arms. Before Scott, most guys did basic curls and called it a day. Scott developed the preacher curl, a movement that isolated the biceps in a way nothing else could. His arms measured over 20 inches, but it wasn't the size that impressed Zane. It was the shape, the peak, the way Scott's biceps looked like mountains rising from his arms. Scott competed at around 205 pounds. Not huge by today's standards, but his proportions were insane. He had that same narrow waist Zane admired, combined with incredibly wide shoulders and those legendary arms. What really connected them was philosophy. Scott believed in feeling every rep, controlling the weight, focusing on the muscle rather than just moving iron. He'd spend hours on arm training alone, working from every angle, adjusting his grip, changing the tempo. This methodical approach resonated with Zane's scientific mindset. Zane has talked about how Scott's training journals influenced his own methods. Scott kept detailed notes on every workout, every meal, every change he noticed in his physique. He treated bodybuilding like a research project, testing hypotheses about what worked and what didn't. When Zane read those journals, he recognized a kindred spirit. Both men understood that the brain was the most important muscle in bodybuilding. You couldn't just lift heavy and hope for the best. You had to think, analyze, and adapt. Scott's arm development proved that targeted, intelligent training could overcome genetic limitations. His bicep peak wasn't natural. He built it through thousands of perfectly executed reps using techniques he invented himself. What made Scott even more remarkable was that he retired at his peak. After winning 2 consecutive Olympias, he walked away. No comebacks, no attempts to hold on to glory. He'd achieved what he wanted and moved on. That decision earned Zane's respect. In an era where competitors kept grinding long past their prime, Scott showed discipline most guys couldn't imagine. He proved you could be a champion and still have perspective, still know when enough was enough. Sergio Oliva landing at number 3 is where things get really interesting. The Myth, as everyone called him, was basically Zane's opposite in every way except one, the waist. Oliva stood 5'10" and competed at around 240 pounds, absolutely massive for the late 1960s and 70s. His arms measured 21 inches, his chest 58 inches, his thighs 30 inches, but his waist just 28 inches, even thinner than Zane's. That freakish V-taper, combined with his incredible muscle belly length and density, made him look like something out of a comic book. Oliva won Mr. Olympia 3 times, and in 1969, he beat Arnold Schwarzenegger so decisively that Arnold didn't even compete the next year. That's the level of dominance we're talking about. Oliva had this unique ability to look both massive and aesthetic at the same time. His muscles had this flowing, almost liquid quality, like they'd been poured into his frame. Where other mass monsters looked blocky and thick, Oliva maintained lines and separation that shouldn't have been possible at his size. Zane has admitted that training alongside Oliva in the early days was both inspiring and intimidating. They'd be in Gold's gym, and Oliva would be moving weights that seemed impossible while maintaining perfect form. But what really impressed Zane wasn't just the strength, it was how Oliva posed. The man was an artist on stage, knowing exactly how to display every muscle group, how to transition between poses smoothly, how to make the audience gasp. Oliva understood presentation, and that's something Zane valued almost as much as development itself. Their relationship had its tensions, they competed against each other, and Oliva's size represented everything the sport was moving toward, everything Zane was fighting against, but Zane never let personal rivalry cloud his judgment. He could recognize greatness even when it challenged his own philosophy. Oliva proved that mass and aesthetics didn't have to be enemies. You could build enormous muscles and still maintain proportion and flow. Not everyone could do it. Most mass monsters of that era looked like walking refrigerators. But Oliva was different, special, and Zane knew it. There's also a sadness to Oliva's story that Zane respects. Oliva defected from Cuba with nothing, built himself into a champion, then watched the sport move even further towards size in ways that made his own massive physique look small by comparison. He dealt with personal struggles, health issues, and the knowledge that younger competitors were using substances he'd never touched. Despite everything, he maintained his dignity and his love for bodybuilding. That kind of character matters to Zane, who's always believed the sport should be about more than just trophies. John Grimmick at number 4 is a deep cut that shows just how much Zane studies bodybuilding history. Most modern fans have never heard of Grimmick, but in the 1940s he was the absolute king. Before Mr. Olympia existed, before bodybuilding became a mainstream sport, Grimmick was winning everything there was to win. He took Mr. America in 1940 and 1941, and the Amateur Athletic Union actually changed the rules afterward to prevent anyone from winning twice. That's how dominant he was. What made Grimmick special wasn't just his physique. Though at 5'8" and 215 pounds, he was incredibly well developed for that era. It was his versatility. Grimmick was a legitimate strongman who could press, squat, and deadlift massive weights. He represented old-school strength training before bodybuilding and powerlifting split into separate sports. His legs were absolutely massive from years of heavy squats. His back was thick and wide from endless rows and deadlifts. But he also had the aesthetics, the posing ability, the stage presence. Zane has talked about finding old magazines from the 1940s featuring Grimmick's training routines. What struck him was how complete those workouts were. Grimmick trained every muscle group with the same intensity. No weak points, no shortcuts. He'd do heavy compound movements for strength, then isolation work for definition. He understood periodization before anyone called it that, knowing when to push hard and when to back off. His training philosophy influenced generations of bodybuilders who came after him, including Zane himself. There's also something pure about Grimmick's era that appeals to Zane. No advanced substances, no social media, no supplement sponsors, just men pushing iron in basement gyms, trying to build the best bodies they could with basic equipment and determination. Grimmick proved what the human body could achieve with hard work and smart training. When modern bodybuilders claim they need the latest gear and substances to compete, Zane can point to Grimmick and prove them wrong. Obviously, the sport has evolved, and today's competitors face different challenges. But the foundation, the work ethic, the discipline, that was perfected by guys like Grimmick decades ago. Grimek lived to be 94, still training well into his 80s, and that longevity matters to Zane. At 83 himself and still hitting the gym 5 days a week, Zane sees Grimek as proof that bodybuilding doesn't have to destroy your body. Done right, with intelligence and moderation, it can enhance your life for decades. Too many champions from later eras faced serious health problems or didn't make it past 60. Grimek showed there was another way. Now here's where Zane's list gets controversial. Ronnie Coleman at number 5 seems like a contradiction. Coleman represents everything Zane's career opposed. 8-time Mr. Olympia, peaked at 300 pounds of muscle in contest shape. Famous for screaming "yeah buddy" and "lightweight baby" while squatting 800 pounds. Coleman's physique was about absolute mass, about being the biggest, thickest, most conditioned human being ever to step on stage. His legs were bigger than most men's torsos. His back looked like a relief map. His arms hung away from his body because his lats were so enormous. So why does Zane, Mr. Aesthetics himself, put Coleman on his list? Because Zane isn't blind and he's not a hater. He can appreciate greatness even when it exists outside his preferred style. When asked about Coleman, Zane said he had so much muscle and he was symmetrical in his own way. That's high praise coming from someone who built his career on being the anti-mass monster. Coleman proved that mass could have structure. Yes, he was enormous, but he wasn't just big. He had shape, separation, conditioning that defied logic at his size. Zane has also talked about respecting Coleman's work ethic. The man trained with an intensity that was almost frightening. Heavy squats, deadlifts, rows, presses, all while maintaining a conditioning level that most lighter bodybuilders couldn't achieve. Coleman's training videos became legendary because you could see the pain, the effort, the absolute refusal to quit. That mentality resonates with Zane, who's always believed bodybuilding rewards those willing to suffer for their goals. There's also an honesty to Coleman that Zane appreciates. Coleman never pretended to be something he wasn't. He knew he was a mass monster, embraced it, and pushed that style to its absolute limit. No apologies, no trying to claim he was aesthetic when clearly the goal was size. That integrity matters. Too many bodybuilders try to be everything to everyone. Coleman knew who he was and owned it completely. The tragedy of Coleman's story also factors in. Multiple back surgeries, hip replacements, years of chronic pain from pushing his body beyond reasonable limits. Coleman can barely walk now, needs a cane, has admitted the price he paid might have been too high. Zane, who's maintained his health into his 80s by training smart rather than extreme, sees Coleman as both inspiration and cautionary tale. You can achieve incredible things with enough determination, but you have to be careful not to sacrifice your future for present glory. But there's a sixth name that Zane mentioned, and it's the most complicated relationship of all. Arnold Schwarzenegger. Calling Arnold a favorite is weird given their history, but ignoring him would be dishonest. Arnold and Zane trained together in the early 70s, shared techniques, pushed each other in the gym. Arnold was the rising star, massive and charismatic, while Zane was still developing his own physique and philosophy. They had mutual respect, at least initially. Then competition changed everything. When Zane started beating Arnold and other mass guys in the late 70s, it proved that aesthetics could triumph over size. Those 3 consecutive Olympia wins from 1977 to 1979 were Zane's vindication. He'd shown the judges and the world that proportions, symmetry, and conditioning mattered more than weighing 240 pounds. Arnold had already retired by then, so they never faced each other during Zane's peak years. The real controversy came in 1980. Arnold made his infamous comeback at the Olympia in Sydney after 5 years away from competition. He won, despite looking noticeably off his previous form, and the decision sparked outrage. Many believed Chris Dickerson, Mike Mensa, or even Zane himself should have taken it. Rumors swirled about politics, about Arnold's influence, about judges being pressured. The controversy nearly destroyed the Olympia's credibility and left bad blood that lasted years. Despite all that drama, despite the competition and the controversy, Zane still sought Arnold's advice after they both retired. Arnold had successfully transitioned to movies, business, and politics. He'd leveraged bodybuilding into genuine mainstream success, something no one else had managed at that level. Zane respected the intelligence required to make those moves. Arnold wasn't just a bodybuilder with charisma, he was strategic, calculating, always thinking several steps ahead. Their relationship evolved into something like mutual admiration between old warriors. They'd both changed bodybuilding in their own ways. Arnold made it popular and profitable, Zane made it artistic and refined. Arnold proved bodybuilders could be movie stars. Zane proved you didn't need to be huge to be a champion. They represented 2 different visions for the sport, both valid, both influential. Zane has said that if he were competing today, he'd be in the classic physique division, not open bodybuilding. That division was basically created for his style, a weight-restricted category that rewards aesthetics over mass. He's pointed to Chris Bumstead as the modern embodiment of what he built in the 70s. Bumstead competes around 230-240 pounds at 6'1", has that same tiny waist and wide shoulders, focuses on symmetry and flow rather than just size. When Bumstead poses, you can see Zane's influence in every transition, but Zane also acknowledges that open bodybuilding has its place. Guys like Big Ramy and Nick Walker are pushing the limits of human muscularity, exploring what's possible when you remove weight restrictions. That's not Zane's preferred aesthetic, but he understands the appeal. Some fans want to see absolute mass, want to witness humans who look like they shouldn't be able to exist. That's valid too. What's remarkable about Zane at 83 is that he's still learning, still evolving his training. He's incorporated more stretching, more mobility work, adjusted his lifting to protect his joints. He said his workouts now focus on maintaining what he built rather than adding more. The goal is longevity, staying active and healthy for as many years as possible. When you compare him to Coleman, barely mobile at 60, the contrast is stark. Zane's approach might not have produced 8 Olympia titles, but it produced a life where he can still train, still enjoy movement, still inspire others. His list of favorite bodybuilders reflects this evolved perspective. He can appreciate Reeves' classical perfection, Scott's innovative spirit, Oliver's freakish genetics, Grimek's old-school toughness, Coleman's extreme mass, and Arnold's strategic genius. Each represents something valuable about bodybuilding. Reeves showed it could be art, Scott showed it could be science, Oliver showed it could defy expectations, Grimek showed it could be sustainable, Coleman showed it could be pushed to absolute extremes, Arnold showed it could be a platform for greater success. What connects all these men, and what connects them to Zane, is obsession. They didn't just work out, they devoted their lives to understanding their bodies, testing limits, perfecting techniques. They sacrificed relationships, money, comfort, sometimes health, all to achieve something most people thought was impossible or pointless. That single-minded focus is what Zane recognizes and respects in each of them. There's also an acknowledgement of different paths to greatness. Zane could have tried to add mass, to compete with the bigger guys on their terms. He chose not to. He refined his own style instead, and proved it could win. That took courage, especially when everyone was telling him he needed to get bigger. His favorite bodybuilders showed similar courage in different ways. Reeves walked away from bodybuilding for Hollywood. Scott retired at his peak. Oliver defected from Cuba with nothing. Grimek maintained his principles in an era with no money or fame. Coleman pushed himself past the breaking point. Arnold bet everything on becoming more than a bodybuilder. The sport has changed dramatically since Zane's peak. Prize money is higher. Social media has created new opportunities. Supplement companies throw money at anyone with a decent physique. But the fundamentals remain. You still have to put in years of consistent work. You still have to master your diet and training. You still have to develop stage presence and posing ability. You still have to want it more than anything else. Zane's favorites all understood that, and that's why they're still remembered decades after they competed. At 83, Frank Zane has nothing left to prove. He's a 3-time Mr. Olympia, a Hall of Famer, a legend whose influence extends far beyond his competitive years. When he names his favorite bodybuilders, he's not trying to start arguments or chase clicks. He's sharing the influences that shaped his understanding of what bodybuilding could be. He's acknowledging the giants whose shoulders he stood on, the rivals who pushed him to improve, and the innovators who expanded the sport's possibilities. His list reveals a man who appreciates excellence in all its forms, even when that excellence contradicts his own approach. That's wisdom you only gain from decades in the sport, from experiencing triumph and controversy, from watching generations of bodybuilders come and go. Zane understands that bodybuilding is big enough for multiple visions, multiple styles, multiple definitions of perfection. From Steve Reeves' classical proportions to Ronnie Coleman's extreme mass, from John Grimek's old-school strength to Larry Scott's innovative techniques, from Sergio Oliver's freakish genetics to Arnold Schwarzenegger's strategic brilliance, each of Zane's favorites contributed something essential to bodybuilding's evolution. They proved there's no single path to greatness, no one correct way to build a legendary physique, and that might be Zane's ultimate legacy. Not just his 3 Olympia titles or his perfect proportions, but his understanding that bodybuilding is an art form with infinite possibilities. Whether you pursue aesthetics or mass, whether you compete at 905 pounds or 300, whether you train for health or glory, there's room for you in this sport. As long as you bring obsession, intelligence, and respect for those who came before, you're part of the tradition that connects Reeves to Zane to Bumstead and beyond. The question that lingers is what bodybuilding will look like in another 40 years. Will classic physique overtake open bodybuilding in popularity? Will health concerns force changes to how competitors train and supplement? Will new divisions emerge that we can't even imagine yet? Zane doesn't claim to know, but he's confident the sport will survive, because the drive to build the perfect physique is eternal. As long as humans exist, some of us will be obsessed with testing the limits of what our bodies can become. That obsession is what made Zane's favorites great, what made Zane himself great, and what will create the next generation of legends, whose names we don't yet know.